Welcome everyone to another episode of the Gold Silver Bitcoin Show brought to you by GoldSilverBitcoin.com. We are more than honored today to be sitting down with Doug Casey. And Doug Casey is an anarcho-capitalist thinker. He's also the founder of Casey Research as well. And he's also a New York Times bestselling author. Thank you so much, Doug, for joining us today.
Well, it's nice to talk to you too, Justin, as we were chatting about before the recording started. You're in cold and snowy, but sunny, northern Idaho, and I'm in warm and sunny, and not at all snowy, Uruguay, palm trees, stuff like that.
Yeah, that's beautiful. My wife and I missed that. I will say, though, that it is very nice being able to go outside our home. That's very nice. I think for some people out there in the world, they might not even be able to leave their home right now. It's nice going to a cafe and seeing smiling faces, uncovered smiling faces, people talking to each other. You're walking through the cafe, Doug, and the gentleman sitting at the table next to you is reading Rothbard, and the girl across the way is reading Jordan Peterson. That's what it's like here. And I think that, we're grateful for that, although it is a little chilly here right now.
Well, that's very nice. Of course, I lived in Aspen, Colorado, the People's Republic of Aspen, Colorado, for many years. And I recently sold a ranch that I had just outside of town for lots of reasons. But one of them is that kind of ambiance that you just mentioned is totally absent in Aspen. It's full of two classes of people. Billionaires who have so much money, they're driving the multimillionaires out of town, and essentially welfare recipients that live in so-called employee housing, welfare housing. So it's an atmosphere of class warfare, and they're all masked up, and it's very PC. So I'm glad, after many years of being in Aspen, to be out of there, and I'm on the pampas of South America right now, which I like.
I was reading a review by CNN of vacationing in Mexico, and the author was lamenting how nobody was taking regulations seriously in Tulum when it comes to preventing the spread of disease, in quotes. I'm very PC on this show because my master YouTube is watching, but there's a few topics that we can't really dig too deep in or on YouTube, but everything else for now seems to be fair game. So in Tulum, the CNN reporter was lamenting the attitude there, and Tulum to me became very attractive. I'm like, that sounds like a place I want to go visit. What's it like in Uruguay?
It's middle of the road. Like most Latin American countries, they don't take things terribly seriously. So there's no scolding if you don't wear a mask. And of course, some restaurants, just like when where was I, in Mexico about 6 months ago, you walk up to the restaurant, you're not masked, you're standing at the door, and they insist that you put on the mask for the danger zone in between the door and the table, at which point you can take off your mask. So nonsense like that's going on in lots of places in the world. And it's discomforting because it shows me that I'm living on the planet of the crazy chimpanzees, where people are, they're not rational. They simply don't think things out. They do as they're told. But the answer to the question is, Uruguay is nice. Now I'm in the middle of a fairly large estancia, and I'm close to Punta del Este, which is the resort capital of the town. I don't go in very often because I have everything I want here on the farm. So it's nice, but I guess if I was going to escape to Latin America at this point, leave the US, where would I choose? I might choose Mexico. Mexico appears to be about the freest place. El Salvador, place which I never liked, horrible place, I always thought, but maybe it's turned a corner under their new president with their so-called Bitcoin beach and so forth. Panama, okay, but lots of mass hysteria there, otherwise nice. Colombia, Brazil. I've spent a lot of time in every single country in Latin America. But I wound up here in Uruguay because it's small and quiet, peaceful. So as good a place as any. And I'm just across the river from Buenos Aires. So if I want to be cosmopolitan. Anyway, that's kind of more information than you wanted to know, I guess.
No, it's interesting because I want to travel. My wife and I want to travel, and there's only certain places we can travel to. And it's going to take a whole new, actually, I think there's a new market here for the expatriation industries really needs to start educating people about what's possible out there. And many of us don't know. So El Salvador, you mentioned, can you speak to like your thoughts historically on El Salvador and why you think they may have turned the corner under Bukele?
Well, it's a small country, very densely populated, uh, lots of violence. I mean, they had a nasty civil war down there some years ago. And of course, their main exports, I guess, are coffee, bananas, and MS-13 gang members. And the capital, it's the capital called Salvador itself. It might be, I can't remember.
San Salvador, I think.
Yeah, it might be. Most unimpressive place. So, but it just goes to show a flower can bloom in the worst dung pile. In fact, in today's world, dung piles are places that you'd best look for flowers because they have the kind of nutrients where people get fed up enough that they just want a change of some type. And sometimes the change is favorable. Of course, most of the time, when there's political change in the world today, it just gets worse. So I can't speak to El Salvador. I spent a few days down there a few years ago, before Bukele. Don't know really what to say other than what I read on the internet, and I tend to discount almost everything that I read everywhere these days anyway.
I was at the Bitcoin 21 conference in Florida where El Salvador made the announcement that they were implementing this Bitcoin law. Bitcoin was becoming legal tender. In the law itself, it mentioned that the actions of central bank were forcing El Salvador to need to make this law. And the crowd there of thousands of people stood up and cheered maniacally. And that was a red flag to me. I was like, something about people screaming maniacally makes me wonder what is really going on here. So we've seen that play out though over the last 6 months, and there's been sort of this, I guess, political theater as far as we know, where the IMF is telling El Salvador to knock this off, and El Salvador saying, no, we're going to implement Bitcoin as a legal tender. And then the Bitcoin industry is looking at El Salvador and Bitcoin City in particular as a citadel in South America. People moving there, zero income tax, I believe, business tax as well in this Bitcoin city next to a volcano, which I suppose hopefully it doesn't explode, or there might be fewer Bitcoins in circulation after that. So can you speak to, like, I guess, Bitcoin and Bitcoin in El Salvador, how you view that?
Well, I'm a fan of Bitcoin, and I have been. I was always a fan of it in theory. Actually, ever since I was given my first Bitcoin, a physical Bitcoin, which actually exists. I still have it in a safe deposit box, never done anything with it. I guess it's worth more than the Bitcoin itself because it's kind of a collectible artifact. But in any event, I was always a fan of Bitcoin as money, which is its main use, because I could see that it fulfilled 4 of the 5 characteristics of a good money, which were spelled out by Aristotle in the 4th century BC. A good money has to be durable. Yes, it is. It has to be divisible. Yes, it is. Convenient. Yes. Consistent. Yes. 1 Bitcoin. So it's perfect for money from that point of view. But then I asked myself, what's the problem? The big proposition is it has to have some kind of use value so that you don't get holding a hot potato, something that, like a US dollar, which is a fiat currency, which could turn into nothing overnight. And then it occurred to me in well, oh, it was 2017, of course, August, when I went to a conference and I realized, wait a minute, the value of Bitcoin is as a transfer mechanism. It's a way for people to send money across borders quickly and cheaply and with relative anonymity. So at that point, I started getting into Bitcoin, and I bought and sold it a few times, and it's been okay. And friends of mine, I'm not a computer jock. I've gotten good tips on some of these altcoins that have various, so it's been very, very good to me. But let me say this regarding El Salvador. One thing I've learned, because I've been to about 155 countries and I've lived in 10. I lived in them, I mean, been there long enough that I've bought real estate, or should have bought real estate if I didn't. It's that in Latin America, anything can change overnight, as Bukele himself proved with his election, changed things overnight. But things can change in the wrong way as well. And that's what usually happens here in Latin America. So as far as making a significant long-term investment in one country, El Salvador wouldn't be high on my dance card for that. It's too basically unstable. If you want a small but stable country, the place where I am right now, Uruguay, fits that parameter much better. And at the moment, they have a president who is a decent human being. But the last president was a communist guerrilla during the 60s and 70s. So look, these places are crazy. But every place is crazy. Look at the US. I mean, they've elected genuine Jacobins, genuine Bolsheviks to the government in Washington at this point. What's going to happen in the next election? Hell, I don't even know if we're going to have an election in 2024. Anything could happen, even in the US, in between now and then.
Yeah, there's it's very interesting in the US right now. There's a clear divide between the states in particular. I think that the states' rights organization, or rather kind of infrastructure or design, has really kind of proven itself quite useful here, because there is this immigration happening, but it's people who are fed up with and had nothing to do with totalitarian policies in different states moving to those states which they view as respecting their rights more. And in these states which are perceived as respecting rights more, life is continuing very much like it did in 2019, much more so than in some of these other states, especially on the coasts. And then in Mexico, I think what we have is in Mexico, it's a very fragile body politic, but we have a seemingly a president who values liberty and has stated that the most important aspect of this whole COVID pandemic is to preserve the liberty of the citizens. Any thoughts on Mexico?
Well, Mexico. Mexico probably should be at least 3 or 4 different countries, not just one, because it's got cultural zones that differ from each other quite a bit. Well, as evidenced by a rebel movement in the far south in recent years. Anything can change. Anything can happen in these Latin American countries. I really hate to generalize about Mexico, but at the moment, it's a pretty good choice for Americans. But you got to remember that as an American, you're obligated to pay taxes, to file an income tax return and give money to the government, no matter where you are. Even if you never come back to the US for the rest of your life, that's an obligation. And if you do come back to the US and you haven't filed, you could be in a jackpot. So just leaving the country, that could be a step in the right direction, because I'm afraid that the US is evolving towards becoming a genuine authoritarian police state. I mean, it's been headed in that direction for years and accelerating in that direction. And certainly if you're going to stay in the US, some places are much better than others, no question about that. But you really want to get out from under the thumb of the master altogether. And to do that, you have to renounce your citizenship to get out from under the tax system and the financial reporting system. Because look, almost everywhere in the world, quite frankly, it's, if not impossible, it's very hard for an American to open up a bank account or a brokerage account. You really have to be a permanent resident of that country before the local bank will even let you do it. I speak from experience about this. So it's really hard to evade the eye at this point. On the bright side, the US government is getting to the point where it really might just fall apart and implode. But that's been possible for a couple of decades and hasn't happened yet. But then again, you look at the Soviet Union, it was at its most dangerous and its most aggressive back in the 1980s, just before it totally self-destructed a few years later in 1990, 1991. So the same thing could happen in the US, as unlikely as that seems to most Americans.
I read a book in college where I studied history with lots of extracurricular in order to come out of that with my brain unscrambled. And the book I read that I'm speaking about was called Everything Was Forever Until It Was No More. And it discussed, I think in part, the ways in which people were kind of revolted in their own small ways in their daily lives, whether through jokes or otherwise. But it was mainly about how nobody expected that the Soviet Union would collapse before it did. And then one day, everything changed. And it was a shock to many people. And you've kind of mentioned how things can change overnight. And I think that it's a lesson of history about how quickly things could change, even in the United States today. Now, you're an anarcho-capitalist. What in the world is an anarcho-capitalist?
Well, the word speaks to what it actually is. An anarchist is someone who does not believe in the state. And of course, a lot of people have a mistaken view of anarchists. They think that they're violent people that run around with black capes and little round bombs with a lit fuse and want to destroy things. And unfortunately, in the tradition of anarchists, there are a lot of Europeans who call themselves anarchists. And some of them, like Kropotkin and Bakunin, I'm a big fan of their social rhetoric. They're excellent rhetoricians from that side of things, but they don't understand economics at all. Because you can't be a left-wing anarchist. Anyway, an anarchist is somebody that believes in self-rule as opposed to the state ruling you. No rule. That doesn't mean chaos. It doesn't mean violence. It just means that society will regulate itself very much as society does everywhere. It's not policemen that keep society in order. It's not laws. It's the fact that what holds society together is peer pressure, social opprobrium, moral approbation. All right, so that's an anarchist. That's the kind of anarchist I am. I'm in the American tradition of anarchism, people like Spooner. And of course, a capitalist is one that believes in the markets, which is another way of saying you don't believe in the state. So an anarchist and a capitalist actually are the same things. Capitalism, like anarchism, has gotten a bad name for itself, though, because there are all kinds of people that call themselves capitalists, like Republicans, for instance. I actually have come to dislike Republicans even more than I dislike Democrats in today's America, because at least the Democrats are honest. They say they're socialists, and yeah, they're not lying. But Republicans call themselves capitalists, but they're not. Actually, what Mussolini called state capitalists or fascists. And you may have the right to own property, and buy and sell it, which is an element of capitalism, but it's not the essence of capitalism, which is complete free markets. So an anarcho-capitalist distinguishes us from fascists, actually, which is what these other people that call themselves capitalists are, in point of fact. I don't know if I've been clear or not, but that's how I define it. Although not neatly in a nutshell, I'm afraid.
There's many people who've kind of appeared on my radar lately who are smart and intelligent and moral and courageous, and they are left libertarians, for instance, or they're perhaps anarchists in the Noam Chomsky tradition of anarcho-syndicalism. Anarcho-communism is another kind of subsect of anarchy, if you will. Now, in my opinion, I think those are oxymorons. I believe that anarchism essentially means that there is no state organizing society, that they're self-regulating at the grassroots level by individuals, first and foremost. And then I'm very open-minded to that idea and theory and its practicality in daily life as well. However, when we get real down in here, granularly speaking, I also am not opposed to this idea of minarchism, a tiny state. So like, what's your critique of minarchism, if you have one?
Well, look, my personal philosophical evolution, like most kids, I started out as a liberal. I remember growing up in Chicago, I was driving around the ghetto with my mother. I don't know what we're doing there, but I was about 6 years old. I said, it's terrible. These black people live in these shabby houses. And so I asked her to type a letter to President Eisenhower for me, saying, couldn't he do something about it? Well, I was thinking like a 6-year-old, or I was thinking like a liberal. The government ought to do something. My next stage is I became a conservative when I read Barry Goldwater, who was the Republican candidate for president in 1964. That's ancient history now, of course. But he wrote a book called The Conscience of a Conservative, and I realized, oh, this makes a lot more sense, a lot more sense. But I already, was well on my way to becoming an individual, not being like, do I have a problem with authority? No, I just don't like people telling me what to do, that's all. So the next step is I read Ayn Rand. I read her book, The Virtue of Selfishness, which is a work of genius, only, 150 pages long at most. And I had to put it down after the first page because it crystallized in my mind everything that I'd been thinking inchoately for years before. So I passed through my objectivist stage. And after I read the Tannehill's book, The Market for Liberty, which I urge everybody to read, it explains how a society would work from a practical point of view without a government, without a state. And at that point, I became an anarchist. And actually, I've evolved beyond that. I've become something of a Discordian, which means I don't even take ideology seriously anymore. The reason for that is that people do what they do anyway, and the world operates not on ideology so much as psychological aberrations. So, in fact, I'm a solipsist, actually, in many ways. It's that this may all just be a construction of our collective consciousness, for all I know, or maybe these people that say that it's a computer simulation, of anything is possible. So I guess I've lost my moorings from that point of view philosophically.
What surprised me is watching, for instance, conservatives show up at board school meetings and complain that their children are having to wear masks or are learning ideologies they disagree with, when they could just take their children out of school.
Well, and they should, because having the state educate your children makes about as much sense as having the state build your cars, which they used to do with the Soviet Union. You get crappy, overpriced cars. Same thing. I mean, the state is the last thing you should trust your children too with the kind of people that tend to go to work as teachers. So look, the problem with people who go to school board meetings is they talk about small technical points that annoy them, but they rarely have any underlying principles, okay? Whereas the leftists actually do have underlying philosophical principles. And of course, the leftists generally make mincemeat of the conservatives when it comes to talking about questions of right and wrong and good and bad and things like that, because they have principles. Actually, they're a religion. And, you know, I'm not a religious person, but that's another element which I find interesting. It's that Christianity as a religion, it's got its pluses and minuses, but it's dying in the US. And it's what the conservatives held on to. Now they don't have anything to hold on to. They don't know what to believe. But the leftists have a belief. They have a religion, actually. So the prognosis is not good. But you're right, they should take their kids out of schools. That's step one.
I find you mentioned the Republican, at least the Democrats are honest that they're socialists and the Republicans are socialists, but aren't honest with it. I actually think they don't even understand that they are socialists. They don't understand that public school is a socialist institution by its very nature. They're totally oblivious to that.
Well, you're right. And so as time goes on, I've become more cynical, which is to say more realistic. And Einstein, who incidentally said he was a socialist, so what are you going to say about that? But one of the many intelligent things that he did say was after hydrogen, the most common thing in the universe is stupidity. And he was so right. It's everywhere. And stupidity doesn't necessarily mean, although it can mean, a low IQ and an inability to compute things that way. But stupidity is, I think, best defined as it's an unwitting tendency to self-destruction. So all socialists are stupid from that point of view. Although I hate to use that word because it's too much of a name calling. It's too much of a pejorative. That doesn't get you anywhere. But socialists really are stupid. And since I don't like to hang around with stupid people are dangerous, no matter how you define the word stupid. Stupid is really dangerous because it can be unpredictable. And so I don't like to hang around with socialists just because they're annoying and stupid and dangerous in my personal life. You know, I just don't.
Your book, Crisis Investing, was released in 1979. Is it more relevant today, post 2020, than ever before? What do you have to say about that?
Well, one of my real abiding interests is history, ancient history, actually, but history of all kinds. And I increasingly take a long-term view towards things. And when Crisis Investing came out, I wrote it in 78, it was published in 79, became a giant bestseller in 80 and 81. It was the largest selling book of the year in either one of those years of any kind. And the fact is, then we were reaching a cyclical climax where interest rates back in those days were 12, 15, 20%. At the peak, the US government was paying 20% on T-bills. People can't believe that these days unless they remember that, unless they were alive back then. And now for the last 40 years, interest rates have been going down, actually into negative numbers in some places in the world, Europe and Japan, which I thought was metaphysically impossible, incidentally, to have negative interest rates. Well, it's not, because it's a form of tax. Rather clever, actually, because central banks have become more important than governments, actually, over the last half century. But now we're approaching another crisis, much more dangerous than the one of 1980, when the stock market was in the toilet and the bond market was in the toilet and real estate. It was a very tough time in a lot of ways. But now this is was back then, much worse, because all these things that government can do to hold the pressure cooker together, they've used them all. They've taken interest rates as low as they can go. And as a result, there's no savings. And as a result, people that have to live on an income are getting devastated. And as a result, everybody's being forced to speculate to stay ahead of inflation. For the other thing they're doing, creating trillions of new currency units, which are out there. Now, this is going to be a catastrophe. I mean, I could go on for an hour about all the things that they're doing that are really, really destructive. That, but still, things are held together with chewing gum and baling wire. But there's an excellent chance. And I thought, listen, any of the years for the last 10 years, it could have gone over the edge. But it really looks bad this year. So I try not to let it bother me too much personally, though. Well, I'm pretty insulated from it personally. So.
What can people take from crisis investing and apply today?
Well, one thing you can take from it is that conventional and traditional ways of looking at the markets are not optimal anymore, if they ever were. You have to, it's very, very hard to invest these days. Investing, let me define the word, is to put a dollar someplace in such a way as you create new wealth. You invest in a pile of grain, so you get a field of grain. That's investing, okay? That's harder and harder in a time when taxes are high, inflation's high, regulations are insane. Investing becomes very, very hard. So you're forced to be a speculator. And in stable times, speculation often amounts to gambling because there are no distortions in the marketplace. And speculators take advantage of distortions, which are caused by governments, usually in the marketplace. So today, you have to be a speculator as opposed to an investor. And I mean, I say that even as I do make investments. I mean, I've just put 7 figures into a new bank that's starting, because that can be a really good long-term investment. So I do things like that, and but mostly I speculate. And what does that mean today? What do I consider good speculations today? Well, cyclically, gold and silver have been superb speculations. Other times, they've been horrible places to be, because you're playing with commodities, basically. I mean, yes, gold is money. I understand all the arguments completely for that, and they're correct. But on the other hand, gold and especially silver are commodities. I trade commodities every day. I mean, cattle and soybeans and all that stuff. But yeah, you've got to learn to be a speculator. Mainly what I like to do. I'm going on too long here. You know, you started me off on a tangent on this, but I treat gold and silver as savings vehicles, okay? Ever since I bought my first gold coin, a long time ago, 50 years ago, and I bought them pretty consistently over time, sometimes a lot of them. I've never sold a single one. Hasn't paid interest, but it's gone up over 50 times in value. So yeah, that's a pretty good savings vehicle, because I treat it as a, you know, conservation of capital, not an investment or whatever, savings strictly. But for speculating, I've always inclined towards resource stocks. That's to say the metals, gold, silver, but copper, uranium, a whole bunch of them, and oil and gas and coal. Now, coal too, recently. So that's what I do. And I buy these stocks because people think internet stocks, tech stocks are volatile. Yeah, they're volatile. But if they want to know what volatility really is, you got to look at the resource stocks. Moves of 10 to 1 for the market as a whole in the course of a year or so are more, they're often the norm, not the exception. So it's a good place for a speculator, if you know what you're doing. But most people that get involved in them don't know anything about them except that, oh, gold's going up, I'll buy a gold stock. It's probably not the right thing to do.
We have the Robinhood generation now. So young traders are able to get an app and they're able to speculate in the markets. When you look at the markets, what data do you look at the most? When you get to your like most sort of like focused point in research, like what are you really getting down looking at?
Well, look, to start with, I don't really like to do research on individual companies anymore. I'm just not interested, quite frankly. There's too many of them. And I'd rather use my time to enjoy myself because, I don't need to do that anymore. So what do? I employ the services of people that I trust that do that type of thing. Okay. And to start with, when I'm investing in any of these stocks that I'm talking about, resource stocks, I rarely buy them in the open market. Most of them are always looking for money because they're always trying to develop a deposit, and it's a horrible business, incidentally. Investing in resources, well, you can't do that. You only speculate in resources. But a gold mine used to be like having a gold mine, like in Deadwood. You find a gold mine, you're a zillionaire overnight. No, that's not the way it works anymore. Your troubles just begin when you find a gold mine today. Very different business, crappy business. But although I know a lot about that end of the business, I'm really interested in the paper end of the business, what the stocks are doing. And the way you buy these stocks is by financing the companies with private placements, not buying them in the market. You can usually buy the stocks at a discount, sometimes a steep discount, and get a warrant so that even if you sell your underlying stock, hopefully for a profit, you get a warrant so that if it goes wild, you get two kicks at the can. It's not a level playing field. I don't like level playing fields. Everybody says, "Oh, we got to have a level playing field." Well, yeah, I guess for most people, a level playing field would be pretty good because they're at the wrong end. Yeah, but I'm usually at the right end of an on-level playing field. So it sounds cynical, sounds rather cruel, but that's the way the game is structured in today's world.
Joe Rogan puts it, everyone says we have a wealth inequality problem in the country, and he also observes a effort inequality problem in the country. Ancient history.
Inequality problem. I've never listened to his podcast. I should, because I know more people listen to it than listen to, CNN and all the rest of those combined. What's he mean? What are you talking about? An effort inequality.
Well, he's saying that some people don't work at all. So why should they have the same wealth as others?
No, they shouldn't. They shouldn't. In fact, welfare should be abolished completely and absolutely. I'm not sure if you could do it like immediately because these people would riot and break windows, and then you'd have to shoot them, which incidentally is perfectly all right if somebody's destroying your property. But you're not supposed to say these things, I guess. But yeah, absolutely correct. Hey, it's like when the country was founded, in the 17th century. You don't work, you don't eat. It's really pretty simple. And if you can't work, then you ought to have friends that are willing to help you out. And if you don't have friends that are willing to help you out, well, why is that? It's probably because you're a worthless scumbag. So it's really quite simple. I wish, but nobody wants to say that because it sounds so heartless and it's so on PC, I guess. And if you're not PC, then the talking heads will. We live in a very corrupt society. I'm very sad to say, and America's not as bad as most.
I think that understanding corruption and how it works is real important for people to understand history first and foremost, and then to also understand the present day. I think a lot of people don't understand the nature of corruption. And so they don't understand the nature of the problems nor the solutions that people suggest, like you. They think, or me, they think that, I'm basically a Jewish, Mexican, white supremacist to a lot of people, simply because the corruption doesn't mean that corruption makes it so that people can do evil things essentially without being in on the conspiracy, if you will. So when you speak to somebody and you say that, well, these decisions that are kind of destroying the fabric of the nation are being made intentionally so that a certain class can profit or exploit or gain power and control in a certain situation, and then somebody will repost that, well, no, my doctor's not in on any conspiracy. Well, no, but he's maybe weak. He maybe gives into peer pressure. He's maybe corrupt. But enough of that. I want to talk a little bit about ancient history. Like, what do you like about ancient history?
Well, it's a distant mirror. And as opposed to watching the news, which all the dust hasn't settled yet. And of course, in ancient history, there's all kinds of things that happened behind the scenes that we don't know. All we really know is what we know from archaeology and what a few writers whose writings have survived. Still, there's enough stuff that you can think about it. And look, I'm a big fan of knowledge. The more you know, the more things that you can take advantage of to improve your standard of living, to help your friends, and it's more amusing. The more you know, the more entertaining the world is. So, yeah, ancient history, I'm a fan of that, but I'm a fan of all types of knowledge. Although, in the end, it's all dust in the wind, quite frankly, because let's say I put together a big pile of gold, and I kick the bucket. Well, then what happens? It's not going to do me any good, and the state's going to try to steal a bunch of it. Although I'm going to try to deny 100% of it to them. So what's the point of getting more than a certain amount of money? Quite frankly, I mean, there's a certain limit. I mean, I thought, gee, one reason to be worth billions is that you can take over a country. That's kind of an interesting idea, but I don't know. Look, we're really talking about the meaning of life, okay? Suppose you're given 80 years on the planet. How should you spend them? Well, I don't know. There's lots of answers, but perhaps that's the most important thing to talk about, as opposed to how you grub more effectively for roots and berries, so you got a bigger pile of berries than the guy next to you. I don't know.
So what are your thoughts today on the meaning of life?
Well, what is the meaning of life? It depends on so many things. Do you believe that there's a God? Well, that could alter your response. I don't believe there is a God, incidentally. I'm not sure there is a meaning of life, to be honest with you. I mean, look, the most important thing is just being honest with yourself whenever you can, calling a spade, calling it the way you see it. And if somebody can show you that you're saying it wrong, well, then correct your course. But I mean, maybe reality itself is a cruel joke. I mean, this is why one of the things that really interests me a lot is astronomy and cosmology, not particularly looking at the stars through a telescope. Yeah, that can be fun, but contemplating the origin of the universe, how large it is, how big are trying to put us all into context and so forth. And I think that's even important when you're playing in the financial markets, because it's got to keep these things in proportion.
I mean, you come from the long line of people who have spoken their minds in the US, who have espoused American anarchist ideas. And I think that it's because of the efforts of people like you that the US isn't Australia today domestically, that there is still a diverse conversation taking place, like we see at Bitcoin 2021, where they said 12,000 people showed up. I don't know if that's a true number, but what I do know is that there was a ton of people there to hear Ron Paul speak, to listen to discussions about central banks, about debts, about nation states, about fiat currency and the ills thereof. And I mean, for me, as far as I can tell, that's pretty much as close to the meaning of life as we can get today, is trying to preserve all the good values that have been passed on down through the centuries in Western civilization, many of which, in my opinion, although I am irreligious and I was an atheist when I was very young and very quickly became a naturalist, in which I believe God is nature and nature is God, etc. But the 10 Commandments stand out to me as providing meaning. But I think more to the point is this conversation that we're still able to have, that we're still preserving these values of the individual, of freedom and liberty and justice, and yes, equality too. And not so much the pursuit of happiness. I think that's kind of a vague pursuit, but like, the pursuit of love, if you will. I know that sounds quite hippie, but I call myself a classical liberal just to kind of, I guess, troll my many of my peers who are on the more socialist side of things. But what are your thoughts on any of that?
Well, I don't know. Look, it's all just opinions. We all got opinions, and we talk about opinions and so forth. I guess my explanation of it would be, this is why I've gotten out of writing nonfiction books. And the only thing I'm interested in writing now really is fiction, because you can say things in the form of fiction that you cannot say, or maybe you'd better not even dare say, in the form of nonfiction. So I don't know, were you aware of the fact that
No, go on.
oh, well, this is interesting. And I think our listeners or viewers might be interested in them too. There are 3 well-written novels, 3 out of a series of 7, following the, and they're practical novels also, from especially from the point of view of a younger person, because it traces the hero of our history, of our hero, whose name is Charles Knight, as he goes through 7 increasingly politically incorrect occupations that have very bad reputations. So he becomes a speculator. He makes a lot of money accidentally in mining stocks and goes to Africa to see if the mine is real, finds out it's a fraud, which many of these companies are, and gets involved in a bush war in Africa. So it's a hell of a good read. It's called Speculator, okay? So it's on Amazon. And after the government steals most of his money, but he keeps some of it, he travels around the world for 7 years, which incidentally is one thing I recommend everybody do, certainly when they're under 30. Just see the world. Of course, today that's much harder than it used to be. The world is changing, but still it's possible. And he becomes then a drug lord, both legal and illegal drugs. And that's very interesting. It's very rather topical with all the stuff going on about the COVID hysteria and the rest of it. So a drug lord, and he makes a lot more money, and the government steals that from him too, and puts him in jail for 2 years, which is no fun. And then when he gets out of jail, he decides that there are some people that just need killing. And he becomes an assassin, which is the 3rd novel, which is a study of whether it's right or wrong, good or evil, to kill people in general and political people in particular. That's a hell of a good novel. And that's the most recent one, just out last year. And the next one is Terrorist, because I've got a lot of views on that. And then we wrap it up from there. So everybody should go on Amazon if they like anything that I've had to say and pick those books up. Speculator, drug lord, and terrorist, and assassin. I'm getting ahead of myself. And in answer to your question, I think those books kind of explain my views on all these things. So if you're interested, do it. If you're not interested, it's okay. There's millions of books out there.
What's it like writing fiction compared to nonfiction?
Well, it's a totally different skill. I think it's a very different skill. The organization, what you got to do is different. Your readership is different. People that read nonfiction and the people that read fiction, well, some read both. I do, but generally speaking, people go for one or the other. And it's a different market. So I'm glad I'm doing that now. But listen, you can get lucky if you have something to say, writing a nonfiction book. And I certainly did with several of my nonfiction books. They were big bestsellers. Like my first book, The International Man, set a record which is absolutely never going to be broken. It was the largest selling book in the history of Rhodesia. And of course, since Rhodesia is not there anymore, it's obviously not broken. But I met a lot of really interesting people through that book. But yeah, look, writing is basically something that you do because it helps you formulate and crystallize your own thoughts. I mean, actually, that's how it starts out for a lot of people, I think. So I recommend everybody try to write a book just for the hell of it.
What tips do you have to somebody trying to write a book?
I can't think of anything. Make sure you know what you're talking about. That helps a lot. And in order to write a book worth reading, you've got to have an essential base of experience and knowledge. If you don't have that, then, well, you probably wouldn't even think of writing a book because you haven't even read any to start with if you don't have a base of experience and knowledge. But, it's a worthwhile endeavor.
What hope do you have for the future of humanity? Is there hope for the future of humanity?
Oh, I think, well, look, I don't really care much about the future of humanity, quite frankly. It depends on whether I'm reincarnated or not, which has nothing to do with the belief in God, incidentally. So I don't know if I will be or not. I can build arguments all kinds of ways about that. But otherwise, right now, I think we're living on the planet of the crazy chimpanzees. So I don't actually care what happens to humanity in general. I care what happens to individual humans that I can think of. But I'm not very optimistic about the way most things are going to work out over this decade. It's going to be very, very tumultuous and could be very, very dangerous. And we're quite likely to see something resembling World War III, but it won't be anything like World War II. It'll be much worse than World War II, which in turn was much worse than World War I. So, kind of hang on to your hat. And mostly, I'm planning on watching it on my widescreen from a relatively secure location as opposed to out my front window in the US, which will probably be an epicenter of lots of turbulence. But it's hard to tell how this will all evolve.
Did 2020 surprise you? This is my last question. Did 2020 surprise you? The way in which it played out?
Oh, with the COVID hysteria?
And what the IMF dubs the Great Lockdown. Like we call it COVID, and there's someone else, there's a whole other group of people that view it as something completely different. The IMF termed it on their website the Great Lockdown.
I know. Look, these people are basically criminal personalities. They really are. Because the kind of people that get into government, nationally and internationally, and the higher you go, the worse they are. There's two kinds of people in the world. People that like to control physical reality and manipulate things, I'm all for them. They're inventors and industrialists and stuff like that, shopkeepers and whatever, farmers, whatever. And then you got people that like to manipulate other people. And those people are inevitably drawn to government because that's what government does. So, but these horrible people are the ones that are put on a podium by everybody when they're the worst kind of people possible. I mean, best case, they ought to be in jail or washing the floors, you know, someplace. Actually, and I don't believe in conspiracies per se, because these people are untrustworthy. They know better than to trust each other. And they don't, but they have common interests, okay? And common philosophies and values. So it looks like a conspiracy. But that's a whole different subject, okay? And we can't talk about that now because we've probably gone on too long already. I just want to recommend people read the novels. I think they're going to enjoy them.
We've had the honor and privilege of sitting down today with Doug Casey. He's the author of fiction books, Drug Lord, Assassin, Speculator. Of course, I'm sure many of you know him from his work with Casey Research and as an anarcho-capitalist over the years. Thank you so much, Doug, for sitting down with us today.
Oh, one other thing. I'll mention this to them. I do a blog. It's called internationalman.com. And I write an article there every week. So that's free, internationalman.com. And I have a podcast called Doug Casey's Take on YouTube. So people can go there too if they want more of this kind of stuff.
Well, I'll make sure to mention you when I post this on YouTube. Thank you, Doug, for joining us today. And thank you, everyone, for listening.